Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I'm Paddy Tillett, President of the City Club. Welcome to a timely City Club Friday forum on the upcoming legislative session and the massive budget shortfall facing our elected officials. Our speakers today hold pivotal positions in this issue: Senate President Gene Derfler and Senate Minority Leader Kate Brown. But first, a few announcements. On Friday, January the 25th, the City Club will present an examination of the future of energy in the Pacific Northwest. Our speaker will be Ralph Kavanagh, Senior Defense Attorney for the National Resources Defense Council, and that'll be here at the MAC. We've just begun a new Portland seminar series, and there are still a few spaces available for City Club members to participate. So if you're interested, either complete the form in the bulletin or call Suzanne at the office. Wearing of name tags at Friday forums seems to be helpful to many people, so please do use them. And if you have any questions about the club, ask a board or a staff member wearing these plastic name tags. Our board host today, sitting at the far end of the table, is Susan Kelly, who's a member of the Board of Governors and assistant to Commissioner Charlie Hales. She'll have the privilege of asking the first question of our speakers. Following Susan's question, we'll open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. Please be ready at the microphone with your question and identify yourself as a member of the City Club, and please ask your question clearly and concisely. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Weyerhaeuser, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and Pacific Care, and we're very grateful for their support. Gene Derfler, our Senate President, was first elected to the Oregon legislature in 1988 as a state representative. In 1994, he was elected to the state Senate, and 3 years later was made Senate Majority Leader. And last year, he became Senate President. Mr. Derfler grew up in Oregon and Washington, served in World War II as a flyer for the Navy, where he met his wife Thelma, returned to Oregon and built a successful business. In 1980, he turned to real estate, yet devoted much of his time to community work, notably for Salem schools. He serves on the boards of the YMCA, Cascade Employers, Goodwill Industries, Gilbert House, and Rotary, besides his work on many other boards and commissions. Kate Brown completed 3 terms as Senate representative before being elected to the state Senate in 1996. She became Senate Democratic Leader in 1998. Ms. Brown graduated with distinction from the University of Colorado at Boulder with a BA in Environmental Conservation and a certificate in Women's Studies. She went on to read law at Lewis & Clark, emerging with both a law degree and a certificate in Environmental Studies. She's been widely appreciated around the state, gathering numerous honors, including the Profiles of Courage Award from Basics Rights Oregon, the Friends of Cities Award from the League of Oregon Cities, and the Outstanding Young Oregonian Award from the Oregon Jaycees. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the City Club the leaders of both sides of the Oregon legislature, Kate Brown and Gene Derfler.
Thank you very, very much for the introduction, and thanks for inviting us here today. I don't intend to talk too long because I would rather get into the questions and answer. I think that learn a little bit more about what you folks are interested in and what you'd like to know about the legislature. I would tell you that coming in as president this past cycle or this last session, we did try to change how the legislature operated. And I think that we did some focus groups. We found out that most people, the biggest concern they had was all you do is go down and fight and don't do anything. We tried to change that. And we did that. Fortunately, I was able to work with Kate because Kate was amenable to that same change. And we had meetings with the governor, and we got the governor to also engage with us. As you know, the previous session, he vetoed some 69 bills. This past session, I think that was something like 16. So there was quite a reduction because what we did when I asked him when bills were coming through, if he had a problem with them, if he would meet with us and try to explain his position and what we could do then to change that bill so it was acceptable. So I think that was a real positive, I think, for the rhetoric in the legislature. I think that we also, I think, had a good session. That we certainly do not agree on a lot of issues. In the legislature, as you know, we have 90 members. Each one of them has a different background. And we have a spectrum from very, very liberal to very, very conservative. And as you know, we have magic numbers in the legislature. Magic numbers are 16, 31, and 1. To pass a bill in the House, Senate, and get the governor to sign it, it takes 16 votes in the Senate, 31 in the House, and then 1 in the center office, which is the governor. So we had, I think, a much more bipartisan type rhetoric, much more bipartisan passage of bills. We worked together so that we could accommodate each other. We did things differently. As an example, when Kate was elected the minority leader and we made up the committees, I asked Kate to pick the members that she wanted to be on those committees. And that's something that normally doesn't happen. Usually the president of the Senate picks all the committees. We chose not to do that. Even in this past budget cycle we're going through right now, the same thing. When we put a group together to work on the budget, Kate chose the people that she wanted on that particular committee. And I think that worked out very well. During the session, we tried to accommodate each other. As I say, we didn't always agree, but we were never disagreeable, except one time. I made a mistake and crossed Kate, and she let me know about it. And I apologized to her. But other than that, I thought it was a very good session, and I thought we accomplished a lot of good things. Now we talk about where we are today. As you know, we've been meeting this past week, working on the deficit that we have. We have $830 million shortfall in our budget. And the way it was being addressed, we've met with the governor, and he was going to come up with this budget. We asked him if he would refrain from doing that. We asked him if he would let the legislature try to propose a budget first. And he agreed to do that, which I think, again, shows that we are cooperating with both the executive and legislative group. And we put a group together. It was 15 of us that started, and obviously, when you put 15 people in a room, nobody agrees with anyone. And so we tried that for 3 or 4 meetings, and we decided that wasn't going to work. So what we did, again, I picked a Republican, Kate picked a Democrat. The House went a little different. They had 3 people on that committee. So we had what is commonly known in the legislature now as a gang of 5. Before that, we had a gang of 15. So this group met in 3 days. I think they met for 3 days and spent some 40 hours together in the 3 days. So you can understand it was very intensive. They went down through the budget and compromised back and forth, and now they have come up with a budget. Of the $830 million in lost revenue or the reduction of revenue, we are going to rebalance the budget in the emergency board, which is a normal process, of about $125 million. What that means is that the agencies that have overspent their budgets since we've ended the session by $125 million. Some of it has been the growth in the Oregon Health Plan. In fact, the biggest part of that in human resources has been the growth in the Oregon Health Plan. We've added some 43,000 more people to the Oregon Health Plan than was projected at the end of the session. So I don't think we did a very good job of getting the right projections from the agency. Corrections has had quite a few problems in health areas, and so they have overspent some $40 million. And so we have to go back and readjust that so we are in a balanced budget. And then we will perhaps have a special session on the 8th of February to try to balance the rest of it. The group of 5 that came together with a budget is recommending that there's some $400 million in cuts and that there's about $320 million in additional revenue. Those figures were given to our caucuses. I guess not totally, because Kate's meeting this afternoon. we met with our caucus this morning and gave them the figures. And what we have said, now you take a look at these over the weekend and study them, and then we will call you Monday and ask 2 questions. Number one, will you support this budget as is? And if you don't, what do we have to change to get your vote? And we are going to have to work through our caucuses. As you may know, we have some of our members that are not going to vote for it at all. Kate has some in her caucus that will not vote for it. So what we have to do is try to find some place in the middle where we in the Senate can get 16 votes. So that's kind of the plan that we're doing right now. There's still a lot of discussion. The main part of the budget is prepared, but there does need, in my opinion, to be some adjustments, because in its present form, I can't support it. I'll give you an example. They are using $30 million of the 3% charge that we put on electric bills for low income and for weatherizing. And if you understand, we passed that bill last session, Senate Bill 1149 was the restructuring of electric industry, and there is a 3% public purpose charge that's being applied starting in March. And those dollars a lot of them are already spent. A lot of them are will be accumulated to provide for people who can't pay their bills and for weatherizing. The group of 5 chose to take those dollars from that program and put it into the general fund for spending. Now, the problem with it, from my viewpoint, is that the only ones that pay that 3% are people that are on electric companies of PGE and PP&L. So you take, as an example, the city of Eugene that's in a co-op, they will pay nothing toward that. And almost all of Eastern Oregon who are also get electricity from co-ops will not pay anything. So from my viewpoint, that has to be adjusted. That's an example of the kind of things that we are going to have to address. So we're trying really hard to do this in a bipartisan manner, work together, and make it function, and hopefully that we can get an agreement and come together supposedly on the 8th of February and pass the budget and go home. I was hoping for a real a smooth interim this time, but we're not going to have that, obviously. We have to address this issue. So that's kind of where the budget is. We're going to work really hard to try to reach an agreement so that we can do it. No, in the event we don't reach an agreement, what happens? In the event we don't reach an agreement, the governor is obligated under the Constitution to balance the budget. And he will have to make cuts of the $705 million without any additional revenue, because that's what the Constitution requires him. So if we don't reach that agreement, there will be some fairly dramatic cuts in the budget based on that. There's also a discussion on the Constitution says he can only do across-the-board cuts. In other words, every agency has to be treated the same. He has an opinion from the Attorney General that he can adjust programs. Legislative Counsel, who is our representative, saying that no, he cannot. That's unconstitutional. So again, that would be up to the court to decide whether he could make program cuts or across-the-board cuts. So those are sort of the dilemmas that we're looking at, and hopefully that, like I say, that as we progress down this line, that we can reach agreement and pass something and maybe have peace the rest of the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks very much for having us here today. Thank you. I'm starting to lose my voice. It's one of those Clinton things. I did want to acknowledge the role that Gene Derfler has played in this upcoming special session. He has worked on a totally bipartisan level, and I think he's created a framework for the future, and I think we owe him applause. He's just done a great job. Thank you, Gene. He's become a friend, and this might scare some of you, a mentor to me, so. I wanted to talk a little bit, maybe try and draw a bigger picture about why are we here today and what's happening with the budget and where we need to go. I've heard a lot of complaints over the last couple years, some of them from my colleagues in the legislature, about how state government has grown so much over this past decade. Well, as most of you know, there are three primary reasons why state government has grown so much over the last decade. In 1990, Oregonians approved, yes, ballot measure 5, which not only placed a limit on property taxes, but essentially transferred funding for schools to the state level, your general income tax, your general fund. Secondly, in 1994, the voters approved another initiative, ballot measure 11. The result was substantial increases in prison costs, and so much so that in the 99-01 legislative budget, we spent as much on corrections as we did on higher education. And the third reason is the Oregon Health Plan, which the legislature created and the voters recently supported expanding. And I think you'll all agree with me that the Oregon Health Plan, which provides very basic health care benefits to our poor and disabled, is a more fiscally responsible method of addressing health care needs than folks simply showing up at emergency rooms, which is what happened before we had the Oregon Health Plan. In addition, the growth of the economy and the growth of our lottery system throughout the 90s masked the impacts of ballot measure 5 and ballot measure 11. We're also hamstrung at the state level by another fiscal reality. Our general fund is heavily dependent on state income taxes. When we are in a recession, such as this one, personal and corporate income taxes going to the state decrease. When Oregonians are out of work, obviously the income tax revenues that we receive goes down. But in addition, the need for state services increases, so that of course drives up the cost of state government. Today, there are three fundamental services that comprise 90% of the general fund. You all know them: education, public safety, and human services. 90%. Which means one thing in light of our current situation: those three areas are going to have to share the pain in order to rebalance the budget. We would have to cut just about all the other programs, from the judicial budget to economic development to natural resources programs, in order to make up the $830 million shortfall. So, where are we going? Senate Democrats are employing two guiding principles as we rebalance the budget: fairness and fiscal responsibility. Part of our job, regardless of the economic situation, is to make government as effective and efficient as possible. To me, that means we scrutinize every dollar that we spend, and that means that there are no sacred cows, that we continue to look for waste and duplication long after the special session. Here's just one example. In the 90s, our welfare rolls were reduced by half because of the welfare reform. Why then wasn't the agency staff reduced? There may be some reasons why, but we need to be asking that question, and as far as I can tell, up into this last budget cycle, we weren't. I also believe that we have to look at everything, every line item, and every spending decision for fairness. Fairness to the users of the programs, fairness to the agencies, and fairness to those who pay the bills, and that's all of us, the Oregon taxpayers. In light of our current budget situation, we have to ask if it's fair to give a capital gains tax cut to a favorite few when everyone else is sacrificing. We have to ask ourselves if it's fair to allow the implementation of ballot measure 88, a tax cut for the wealthiest Oregonians, when we have the highest unemployment in the country. And we have to ask ourselves if it's fair to spare cuts to education if it means deeper cuts to programs serving abused children. In the very immediate future, of course, we have to rebalance the budget, and Jean talked about that. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury to engage all 90 legislators in a discussion about long-term solutions to our revenue system. That will have to wait until a later date. Our options for solving the current shortfall include use only cuts, and I will tell you that there are members of the Oregon legislature that would support that approach. Use some cuts and some one-time monies. Use some cuts, some one-time monies, some tax increases, and of course, we could make no cuts and use a combination of one-time funds and one-time increases. To talk a little bit about how the all-cuts budget looks, the Eugene Registered Guard described the effect of rebalancing the budget only with cuts. Quote, budget reductions of this magnitude would mean bigger class sizes in schools across the state, higher tuition at universities and community colleges, fewer cells for prison inmates, less health care for our low-income people, an end to in-home care for our senior citizens, the abandonment of a commitment to upgrading engineering programs. The catalog of losses is a lengthy one. The programs affected are ones that policymakers of both parties have agreed pay dividends to the state and its people, end quote. Let me give you a few of the specific examples of the unpleasant effects of balancing the budget exclusively with cuts. Elimination of all school grants to boost reading, reduction of 460 FTE in the higher education system, elimination of health insurance for some families, elimination of the Jobs Plus program, elimination of the Senior Drug Assistance Program, which we worked really hard this last session to create, and I could go on, and I will, just one more. Reduction of 84 FTE from corrections, 58 from state police, and 72 from the Oregon Youth Authority. So this last option I just listed, these all cuts, are only options on paper. In reality, there just isn't the political support for that. But that leaves us somewhere in the middle, as Jean suggested. How much cutting is acceptable and where the fill-in revenue should come from. And that is the essence of our discussions and where we are. I'm in agreement with the governor that we cannot tolerate severe cuts before we start ripping the heart out of basic services that include educating our children, maintaining public safety, and taking care of our most vulnerable citizens. I'm not saying any substantial cuts are acceptable, because if we want to have the best educated workforce in the nation, they are not. If we want to provide adequate health care to those who need them the most, then these cuts are not acceptable. And if we want to protect our seniors and our children, then they are not. But since there's no political support for making no cuts, or very little political support, some sacrifices are going to have to be made, and our priorities are going to have to be re-examined. We do have some options available to us to rebalance the current budget that we can and we should use. Some of you have seen some of the suggestions that the group of five put together. We have the Medicaid MUPL money, the tobacco settlement funds, increasing sin taxes, and accelerating tax collections. Bear in mind that spending some of these dollars may deepen the budget hole for 03-05 biennium, which right now the budget hole is already in the neighborhood of $800 million. And to make matters worse, the revenue forecast in March may be worse, exacerbating our already current $830 million shortfall. So, how are we going to get there? I believe we need to use this opportunity to ask a couple of questions. Number one, what do we want state government to do? Part of reevaluating the role of government is recognizing it cannot solve all of the problems. But in those areas where government can help, let's find some creative new solutions. Second, are we coordinating and integrating with our city and county partners? You're probably tired of me hearing me use this example. But last year, 3 of the 4 bridges to Southeast Portland were under construction or tied up in filming at the same time. That was filming The Hunted. The transportation links to Southeast Portland were absolutely a nightmare. They're already bad, but this time they were incredibly worse. It was an ideal opportunity for our city, our county, and our state partners to coordinate those projects, and we didn't. And third, and more importantly, what do we want our state to look like in the future, given our current economic circumstances? The best way to prevent such severe budget shortfalls down the road is to make sure that Oregon is not so vitally dependent on one source of revenue, the income tax. That is, we need to have a 2- or a 3-legged stool instead of just a 1-legged stool. After a decade of being in the Oregon legislature, it's clear to me that Oregonians do not believe that there is a problem with our current tax structure. I followed in the footsteps of Shirley Gold, and many of you may remember her. She spent over 15 years trying to restructure our tax system when the governor's office, for the most part, and the legislature were under the control of her party, and she still wasn't able to get it done. Until the public acknowledges that there is a problem with our tax system and is ready for a change, we need other solutions to prepare us to deal with a recession or slow growth period. Let me give you some examples. It is absolutely critical that we establish an economic security fund, often called a rainy day fund. Oregon is one of only 5 states that doesn't have such a fund to absorb cuts. Secondly, and Jean's been saying this for a long time, but we need to change our budgeting model. The current service level system is not sustainable and it has no accountability. We need to replace it with a performance-based model or other data-driven system that utilizes the Oregon benchmarks and then ties those benchmarks to the budget. The budget should be about outcomes, not just rolling up a number, and that's what we're doing now. Thirdly, we need to take back our legislative power by not being afraid of the initiative system. We should not let the initiative system prevent us from promoting creative solutions to our toughest problems. Next, we need to strive to find common sense reforms that also provide savings. We've got some large programs and we've got some powerful minds in Salem. Let's seriously consider changes to ballot measure 11 and the Oregon Health Plan that are responsible cost savings and good public policy. And last, we of course need to focus on the economy. Use our authority to create jobs, as ODOT just did in speeding up highway construction projects. Maintain our skilled workforce, create incentives for employers to keep workers on the payroll, and streamline permit processes when it makes sense. This is not just about balancing the budget, but about the future of Oregon. It's about utilizing fiscal responsibility to design the kind of state we want to live in. It's about whether we choose to educate some of our children or all of them, whether we provide health care to all of our citizens or only a few, and whether we protect all of our rivers, streams, and wildlands, or just a fraction of them. Perhaps we could survive with only cuts, but the quality of life, the reason we call Oregon home, will be far different than it is now. I know in the end that we will work together to do what's best for our families and our friends around the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, both Kate and Jean. This is very enlightening, and I know there's many, many questions, so I'll keep mine simple. The recent Oregon Supreme Court decision on term limits. Could you both tell us what effect that will have on the upcoming primary campaigns?
It'll help Republicans keep control.
My theory is a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, and that's what it gives us. We get Senator Peter Courtney coming back, and we know we're going to win some other elections as well, so we're going to be in control.
No, seriously, I think that term limits has been devastating to the state. We lose all of the experience. I often say that a lot of you are business people here. If you had to change every employee in your business every 6 years, how would you operate your business? And that's exactly what we're doing in the largest business in the state. We just lose all the experience, and people are not ready to take leadership in some of the positions that they do. We've been fortunate in the Senate in that the term limits has not hit us yet, and we do get a lot of experienced people from the House moving to the Senate. It would have hit the Senate this next time around had term limits not gone, but we will have quite a few of the experienced people that will run again, like she mentioned Peter Courtney and Lynn Hannon, Charles Starr. We'll have a lot of people that have had experience that will come back. So I think that's a positive. In the meantime, they've already filed an initiative to put it back where it was. In other words, to reverse the court decision that we will go back to 6 and 8, and a total of 12. We are talking about, and we have not made the decision at this point, whether we want to put something in the special session to thwart that next ballot measure. Perhaps we could. We've talked about it, and I haven't talked to Kate a lot about it, but we could put something we could pass something that would go, say, 12 years in any combination. And I really believe that probably 12 years would be adequate, where you could serve 12 years in the House or the Senate, because that's about the turn we get. Actually, we don't need term limits because the average person stays about 12 years. A lot of them say just a couple terms. We have a few, like Cliff Trow and Len Hannon, have been there some 20 years. But again, it's great to have those people there, because when we want to pass a bill, they'll say, well, gee, we did that 15 years ago and it didn't work. And so that's very helpful for us. But we're still contemplating whether we want to put something in a special session to limit it to 12 years, and that's up for discussion yet.
Under term limits, legislators came in with very narrow agendas, and term limits eliminated the incentives and the motivation for them to work with the other party or the other body and to work collaboratively. So I think term limits really increase the partisanship in Salem. You should know I came in opposing term limits. There are some good things about term limits. I wouldn't be here today as the Senate Democratic leader without term limits. And I don't mean that me personally, but I mean, it does give an opportunity for new people to come in leadership, and it does, I think, in Oregon and California has increased the number of women and people of color in our legislative bodies. So there are good things about term limits. I do not support them, but they do help break things up a little bit.
I just make one other comment that it's a lot more difficult in leadership, because it's very difficult to sanction anyone. They pretty much tell you to go to hell when you ask them to do something.
You're right. He's right.
Greg McPherson, City Club member. I agree with Kate's statement that we need a rainy day fund in this state. And my question is, if we succeed in putting a rainy day fund in place so that we can smooth out the peaks and valleys of Oregon's economic life, do we need to restructure the tax system, or will that be sufficient to depend on income tax revenues then, if we can put money aside in the good times so we can pay our way through the hard times?
I would suggest to you that I've been in the legislature almost 14 years. Last session was the first time we ever left any money on the table. We didn't spend the MUPL money, and we didn't spend the cigarette money. First time in the history. We did pass legislation last session. We started to pass it, and I told the chair to kill it, because they were going to pass this rainy day fund with no money. And I said, no money, no bill. We should have put money, we could have put those dollars in, but of course at this point they would be spent. Those dollars, I'm hoping that we don't spend them, because again, that we have a big hole next session, and if those dollars are all spent, you're going to increase the hole that we have. So I don't object to a rainy day fund, but I would tell you that whether you're Republican or Democrat in the legislature, we spend every penny we get our hands on, and running around looking for more. And it's primarily because of organizations like this, and I spoke to the Portland Chamber. You folks are always coming down, pressuring us to spend more money for healthcare, more money for education, more money for all the programs that you want, and we try to accommodate you, and in my opinion, we have been overspending for a number of years. Fortunately, the economy has been good, and we keep getting this money that falls out of the sky, tobacco settlement dollars, MUPL money, which is overbilling the federal government for senior services. And but you know, I tell you, the very last day during last session when we were trying to get out, we were negotiating to spend another $60 million, and fortunately we didn't do it. But it's very difficult not to spend every cent you get.
Greg, I don't know that I have anything to add other than what I said earlier, that Oregonians are not they don't think there's a problem with our tax structure. I'm not saying the people in this room, because I know where most of the people in this room are, but in terms of all over the state, folks are just don't believe there's a problem with our tax system. In terms of creating an economic security fund, I do think in the budget that the group of five created with yesterday or the day before, there is about probably 250 million left on the table. They did that to avoid us going into special session in March so that there's a cushion that the e-board can deal with. I do think that we could use those dollars and create an economic security fund in the event revenues don't go down in March. We'll have already created it and funded it. So I think we need to take a look at doing that now. And Jean did point out, I know that the state government has grown over the last three sessions when the Republicans were in control. So certainly Democrats, Republicans have as hard a time saying no as Democrats.
Sharon Benson, City Club member. In California and Massachusetts, for every $1 spent on tobacco prevention programs, $3 is saved on smoking-caused health care costs. First, I'm sure you're aware that Washington passed the tobacco revenue tax increase, and that will deter both young people smoking and increase revenues. Second, in many states, the tobacco settlement money has not been used for tobacco prevention or health care, and I'm curious about what this budget drafts to address those two areas.
I'm trying to think what we did in tobacco settlement. There is, we did carry, I think, over $82 million in tobacco dollars that, again, this is kind of the money falling out of the sky. I think in the rebalance, I believe they took 20 million, didn't they, out of that, I believe. I think they took 20 million out of that to help balance the budget. We did increase the dollars. I think we spent 17 million last session for tobacco cessation, smoking cessation. I think that probably has remained. I don't think that that's been touched in the budget. And it is true that we tried without success to use the tobacco money for healthcare issues, which I think it should have been used for. But and a good part of it is, but there's a good part that is not also.
My concern is that essentially we will have used all of our tobacco settlement payments from the settlement agreement. The 4 years of payments, we will have used them in the 01-03 biennium. So that is a huge problem. I don't think we've done a good enough job expanding our programs expanding our dollars for tobacco cessation. Jean, I think Jean's number's right about 17 million, but I do believe that number's taking a hit. Our human services programs under the recent budget that came out are taking about a 4.5% hit. So I assume that the tobacco cessation programs will be hit as well. I do know that a huge portion of our Oregon Health Plan clients smoke. I've heard 40%. So it's a self-perpetuating problem, and it's really critical that we stop folks from smoking at the front end. My father's gone through 4 very difficult heart surgeries, and he continues to smoke to this day. So I know it's an incredible problem.
Betsy Warrener, City Club member. Senator Brown, you spoke about building in accountability, and I'm concerned about a perception that many voters have that there's a lot of fat in state services. I work at a community college, and I don't see a bit of fat. I see people working extremely hard and accomplishing a lot. So I'm just wondering how we can address that concern, and if you could say more about the accountability.
We created in the late 80s, early 90s, the Oregon benchmarks, and essentially these were goals. When we had programs, we wanted, I'll use a really specific example, our teen pregnancy programs, and we wanted to make sure that there were only 17 girls per 1,000 getting pregnant. And so that was real specific numbers, and we knew as long as we kept the programs going and the numbers were going down towards 17 per 1,000, that at least the programs were working, that they were going somewhere, and that we were reaching a goal. Well, now we have the benchmarks and the progress board working on the benchmarks. They are essentially no way tied to our budgeting process. The quality education model is the best example I can give you of recent proposals that the commission did that would essentially tie how much we're spending in the schools. Well, I was going to say 5.2 billion. It's not going to be 5.2 billion for the 01-03 biennium, but tie those dollars to making sure that third graders, fifth graders, eighth graders achieve their reading, their math, and their math benchmarks. So it's trying to figure out what it is we're trying to do and how we measure that. We know how to do it. We did it in the late 80s, early 90s. We just need to use it.
I have a question from the floor for both of you. Program or across-the-board cuts, which method is better and why? If, for instance, program cutting is the better option, how can we get there?
If you do across-the-board cuts, there are some areas. As an example, do you want to make across-the-board cuts with state police in a time where we need more state police for protection because of the recent 911 and the fear that we still are going to be attacked? That would not, in my opinion, be appropriate. If you did across-the-board cuts in corrections, are you willing to accept taking people out of prison and putting them back on the streets? Those are the kind of things you do if you do across-the-board cuts. I think program cuts, perhaps even like eliminating some programs, in my opinion, would be better than to just do across-the-board cuts. And that's basically what this group of 5 people did. They went through every line item, budget item, and said, can we get along without this? What happens if we don't do it? And they spent incredible time. Len Hannon told me when the night they did the human resources budget, he said he went home and cried when he thought what the cuts he had to make in those programs. So to make across-the-board cuts, I don't think would be as appropriate as trying to do the individual programs.
I would also agree with Jean. In fact, I agree with Jean a lot of the time. I do think across-the-board cuts is politically easier in terms of trying to explain it to people, but I don't think it makes as much sense. Of the budget that came out yesterday, we take K through 12 education takes about a 2% hit. Human services, as I mentioned earlier, takes about a 4.5% hit. Corrections takes about a 5.8% hit. And the legislative, judicial, and governor's offices take about 6.6% hits. So what the group of 5 and the group of 15 have chosen is to prioritize education for our children, prioritize services for our elderly and our children, and prioritize public safety. And I think in rough economic times, it's really critical that we focus our priorities.
Steve Novick, City Club member. Senator Brown said that we need to ask the question, what should state government do? But as Senator Brown also said, what the state government actually spends the general fund on is a fairly limited number of services: education, public safety, health care, and a few other little things for seniors and kids. That means that the burden of cuts in the budget fall on kids, seniors, and low-income folks who otherwise wouldn't have health care. I wonder if there's been some consideration given to having some of the burden of this budget problem fall on the richest people in the state. Senator Brown suggested postponing the implementation of Measure 88, which was passed by a narrow majority of Oregon voters and which will benefit only the top 40% of the population. You could raise actually somewhat more money, about $200 million, which would solve some, not all of your problem, by establishing a temporary 13% rate, a 4% increase, on single filers who make over $200,000 and joint filers who make over $400,000. I might add that the performance of the economy under President Clinton indicates that when you tax the rich, it helps the economy because those rich people have to work harder and produce more in order to make enough pre-tax income to maintain the post-tax income that will maintain their lifestyles. So I wonder if that's something you'd consider.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that a question or a statement? I don't see the legislature having a tax increase. I don't see the legislature postponing the Measure 88. I believe it does take a supermajority to do that, which is 18 and 36. And I don't believe the votes are there to do that. We'll be lucky to get, in my opinion, to get 16 and 31 for the budget. So I just don't see the votes there for any type of tax increase.
Steve, I don't disagree with you from a philosophical standpoint. I have to deal in the practical realm, and Gene's exactly right. It's really tough. It would be extremely difficult for us to get 36 votes in the House and 18 votes in the Senate to repeal, for example, ballot measure 88. But what we could do is send it out, do a re-referral to the voters. My last experience with us doing that, and Len Bernstein's laughing, was the death with dignity measure that Oregon voters passed by a few percentage points, and the legislature, in its wisdom, sent it back out to the voters to see if that's what they really meant, and they told us by 10 percentage points more that, yes, that is what they really meant. So, like I said earlier, Oregonians don't think we have a problem with our tax structure until we face that reality. It's going to be really hard for us to revise it. And Steve, let me sort of just talk about what do we want state government to do. My bridge example was a great example. I mean, Ross Island was down to one lane, the Morrison was down to one lane. They closed the Hawthorne for filming The Hunted. We could choose for the state to do all of the transportation. We could choose for the counties, the local folks to do all the transportation. I know, for example, there's some counties in Southern Oregon that have a lot of transportation dollars that they can't even use because they don't have the numbers of people to even justify building the roads. I just think we have to have a conversation about what it is we want us to do, and we're going to have to focus what we're doing. We can't do everything, and we're going to have to coordinate better with our county and our city partners. And I could give you another example. This is probably not very politically correct for me to do this, but we spent the entire session creating the Oregon Children's Plan to help firstborn newborns, make sure that their families have the services they need. The other package that we created was a statewide continuum of services to domestic violence. Wonderful programs now mostly being cut. But I know that the city of Portland's looking at going out an initiative a levy measure called the Children's Initiative. And what does that fund? Well, prevention services to prevent abused children, and domestic violence services, and after-school programs. Great about the after-school programs, but if the city's going to go out and fund the abused children and the domestic violence, let's coordinate with what we're doing at the state level and make sure that it makes sense. Or let's try and solve the problem in that levy. So.
Just a quick apples and oranges point, Kate. Transportation has nothing to do with the general fund. That's
right. I understand, but
I'd like to give you another example talking about transportation. We passed a measure to raise gas tax 6 cents a gallon, wasn't it? I think
5 cents.
5 cents. It would have amounted on the average of about $3 a month for a household. Not a big increase. It was referred. I mean, we passed it. It was referred to the people. It went down 88%. 12% of the people voted for it. And I don't know how many in this room voted for it, but it's a pretty good example of what we face. And legislators are extremely sensitive to the votes of people. When they see that happening, there probably won't be another gas tax proposed for quite some time when they see those kind of votes that defeat those measures.
though, of course, if gas prices stay down at $1.09, our chances are better of moving forward with a transportation package. So, other questions?
Go ahead.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. Since 1989, we have more vehicles than people in Oregon, being driven more and more and consuming more and more fuel. Meanwhile, $400 million worth in bonding are going to be spent on roads in addition to the revenue from the gas tax and all other auto-related taxes. There is talk of an increase in the gas tax. The AFL-CIO and the AOI, the Associated Oregon Industry, are proposing a 3-cent, 1 cent each year. Or there will be casting about for other sources of revenue, for the transportation, for the road fund. Meanwhile, the more efficient alternatives, trains and buses in cities and in between cities, are probably going to be cut. What is going to be done to redress this situation in order not to deteriorate our quality of life, in fact, maintain it and maybe even make it better?
Well, I'll take a crack at that. I think that it's very obvious that the voters in Oregon do not wish to use the gas tax to pay for roads. And I think that what's happening, as you know, the cars are more efficient, the trucks are more efficient, and we're changing. It's not going to be very long before we have fuel cells in cars. Cliff Troe, senator from Corvallis, has a hybrid car. He uses gas and a little small engine, but it's an electric car. He doesn't pay very little in fuel tax, and that's happening. And we are going to have to take a look at how can we change how we collect dollars to fix roads. I often Kitzhaber and I have had a little discussion. He came out with this. They called it tax-a-mile or Kitzhaber or something. In other words, when he was proposing that we pay as the amount we drive, and I said, "What planet is this guy coming from to propose such a crazy idea?" But the more you think about it, the more you think that probably not a bad idea. That we ought to be each of us who drive more miles probably should pay more because we use more of the highways, and so I think that I think we do have to restructure. I think we have to think about how we're going to restructure how we collect dollars for roads, because we're not collecting enough to maintain our roads. If we don't have a good road system, you're going to find people not locating in the state in manufacturing because they can't get the product to market. So that's something that's going to have to be addressed before too many years.
I'm smiling because it's congestion pricing, and the reason Senator Derfler is now okay with it is because the Cascade Policy Institute is okay with it. So they
see how mean she is to me?
Yes. They did come out in support of it. It's very interesting because Governor Kitzhaber proposed the congestion pricing, I think, 96, 97, and the Cascade Policy came out with the last year or so with a white paper supporting congestion pricing. So it does make sense. I think we're going to have to work with our federal partners. I do take the bus downtown, but I know a lot of my neighbors don't, and I don't always take the bus downtown. We have a great TriMet system in the Portland area. We really, really do. But it's for folks that are living further out, it's not the best system. So I think we really have to work on the suburb areas. My stepdaughter takes TriMet wherever she goes. She goes downtown. She goes over her friends in Lake Oswego. She goes everywhere. So we have a great bus system. We need to keep work on expanding that as well.
Steve Shell, member, and I'm chairman of the Energy Trust of Oregon, and I want to thank both of you for your support, both in the general session and today, for the retention of the public purpose funding. It's very important to that. But I'd like to ask you a question about the Gang of 5 or the Gang of 15 or whoever it is. It's basically this. Conservation spending by utilities as an element of rates is basically phased out by the electricity restructuring. And it's going to be replaced by this public purpose funding. The question that I have for you is really, are the Gang of 5 or the Gang of 15 willing to postpone or eliminate restructuring if they raid the public purpose funding?
I don't think that was discussed, and unfortunately, I don't think they really understood the program totally. So I think we pointed out to them, first of all, we'd be in litigation if they do that. And secondly, a lot of those dollars are already being spent. Most of the utilities, even the PUDs and the co-ops, are spending at least 3 or 4% of their revenues for weatherization and for low income. And actually all the public purpose does is it puts it on your bill so you know you're paying for a tax. Those dollars are already being spent. So if we take those dollars, then you're going to have to eliminate the weatherization programs, and people that can't pay their bills are going to have their electricity turned off. It's that simple.
Rating the fund is not an option. It's just not.
A question from the floor. Since you don't support term limits, what are your opinions on supporting clean money legislation like that passed in Vermont and Arizona? While the questioner supports experience, incumbency makes challenges uncompetitive in most situations, and clean money elections would likely level the playing field.
I've only taken clean money, so I don't know.
Good answer.
I'm assuming by clean money you're talking about public financing of our campaigns. And one of the interesting stats, and I don't have it on the top of my head, but one of the interesting stats about term limits is since term limits, we spent substantially more on our campaigns. And in fact, a race in Beaverton, Senator Eileen Kitzhaber versus Representative Ryan Deckert, both sides spent about $1.4 million for a Senate seat, which pays about $18,000 a year. So I do support the concept of public financing. The measure that I think it was ballot measure 6 that was on the ballot. I had concerns about it because of our financial situation. It didn't seem appropriate for us to be funding campaigns when we're not adequately funding our schools. So.
A question to both of the guests today. I'm Clem Losberg, a member of the City Club. We all received a kicker check right before Christmas, and I was out of state at the time, and it seemed rather odd that we were getting a kicker check when we were announcing a huge budget shortfall at the same time. Is this the time to talk about getting rid of the kicker, or is this the time perhaps to reverse the kicker, and if our revenues fall short, put a surcharge on?
The kicker is a very sacred thing to a lot of people in the state. I think that it's kind of like sales tax. I don't know that I'll live long enough to see Oregon ever pass a sales tax. We've voted on it 9 times. The closest we ever come to passing it was in 1933 when we got 28% of the vote. I think the kicker is now in the Constitution. It would take a vote of the people to change that. And I think that you would have a very difficult time. Again, I think Kate really hit where we are. People do not think we have a problem. They think that government is overspending and that we need to reduce government. They do not perceive there's a problem. And until there's a crisis or until people recognize that, they are not going to give us any more dollars. And to try to reverse the kicker, I think, would be a very difficult vote to get.
I did want to point out that if we had saved all of the kicker checks that we sent out to you over the last couple of years, we would have approximately $1.4 billion that would have created a very nice economic security fund.
On the other hand, had we not had the kicker and spent the money, we would have about a $2 billion shortfall right now.
Another question from the floor. A news reporter today said that the Speaker of the House thinks the Common School Fund is the state rainy day fund. Do you agree, and should it be used to rebalance the budget?
Well, the proposal is to use parts of that. The Common School Fund goes back almost to the beginning of the history of Oregon when the federal government gave each state every 36th county, and a lot of those were sold off, but a lot of that was combined, and we have the Elliott Forest, which is probably the biggest contributor to the Common School Fund. The Constitution requires us to use those dollars, only the earnings from those dollars, and we do that fairly regularly. There is additional dollars that get put in the Common School Fund. Most of it is unclaimed properties or estates that don't have wills and no claims. Those dollars go into the Common School Fund. There is The proposal is to use about $115 million of the Common School Fund to balance the budget. And those dollars supposedly are in excess